Hi, my name is Josh Drouin.
And I'm Rachel Drouin.
As a couple, COVID sucked. For certain reasons, Rachel and I had to take COVID very, very seriously in the sense where, we couldn't have like close contact. We couldn't hold hands, or like we were in a position where we couldn't spend time together in the same like room, enclosed. So dating through that was a huge challenge.
Yeah, there was probably like a 3-month period where we walked around my neighborhood for hours, and then we would have like screened in porch dates where we would sit on separate couches and like in -2 weather because it was like the spring, and we would just like watch a movie on my laptop and he would bring his own snacks. And that's how we started dating. I think we had like 2 or 3 months pre-COVID of our relationship up until this point. Like that's kind of been our whole story so far together.
Our entire dating life wasn't like existing on the screened-in porch dates, but there was a significant chunk of time where we were getting to know each other that way.
Yeah. We got engaged in the fall, and then we got married on June 11th, 2021. And so that process was really weird because from the fall to the spring, we had no idea what that was gonna look like. I think since we had already lived through like a year of the pandemic, we weren't very like optimistic of what it would be like. We never thought like, oh, we'd have 100 people, we'd have 50 people. Like I think we were just expecting to have like our closest friends around. But even as we were getting close to our wedding, we went into another lockdown. So like we didn't have bachelorette parties. I didn't see my bridesmaids' dresses until like the day of. And like all of it was really crazy. But the day of our wedding is when restrictions changed. So we were able to call up our bridal party the day of, and they all came spontaneously, and we threw it all together. And so our wedding was just our family and our bridal party.
One of the only like benefits of being in like a pandemic and getting prepared to be married was actually like before the engagement, because I had always thought to myself, like, whoever I'm with, I need to make sure that we go through a hard time together before we get married, because like marriage is hard, right? And you know that there's gonna be rough times. So when you're dating somebody and when you're first getting to know them, like you don't really have opportunities to be like, wow, this sucks, like together. And so going through that period of time where we couldn't actually spend time together, like real time together, where you would sit across the table and have a chat or anything like that. Like just having to coach each other through a time like that, and it was a more stressful time for Rachel too, and like being able to coach her through that. I think God was showing me what kind of person that a husband needs to be, and I'm sure he was showing Rachel what kind of person a wife needs to be before we were engaged. And so by the time it came where I was like actually asking her that question, I had a lot of confidence that like, yeah, I can spend the rest of my life with this woman. And she had a lot of confidence to be like, yes.
It was pretty funny though. Like we were starting to get serious in our dating relationship, and Josh said like, oh, before we get serious, we have to face a significant challenge as a couple. And then I think like a week and a half later, the pandemic hit. I was like, is this big enough? Like, does this count? And it was. I think for me, and I think that this would go for a lot of people, is just, I really appreciate church community, like more than ever before. And that's like from both being away from church community for so long and like having to join online. It's just not the same experience, but also like in terms of a wedding, if we didn't have a church community during a pandemic, like I don't even know how we would have felt celebrated as a couple. Like it was unbelievable to like see like people drop stuff off for us all the time. People were sending us messages all the time, like from Compass. And that was like so great, because it was easy as like a bride and a groom to kind of be discouraged and kind of feel like the wedding wasn't really happening because we couldn't do a lot of wedding things, but to have like the church community really having our back and like celebrating us from the sidelines was cool. Like we had a drive-through shower, which was so much fun because we got to have like 4 times the amount of people come than the regular shower. Josh got to be a part of it, and we just got to like be reunited with a lot of people from the church, a lot of people from our friends and family, and so that was a really cool way to be celebrated. And then also just like logistically pulling off a wedding, like it was so like a lot of it was spontaneous, a lot of it happened the week of, and just like people are like, oh, I'll wash dishes, I'll pick up the food, I'll do your makeup. Like it was really awesome. And if we didn't have a church community, like I don't know how we would have pulled it off with the time frame that we had. So it was really cool.
Yes. I agree. One thing that I learned is like, and this is again, like across the board, I think a lot of people have this experience during COVID, is pay attention to what really matters in your life. Like COVID did this thing where everything kind of gets boiled down, right? It's like, oh, you can only see this many people. And so you're thinking to yourself, like, which people do those have to be, right? Or it does this thing where it's like, well, you have to, at one point it's like you have to line up to go to the grocery store, right? So you're gonna ask yourself, like, do I really need what I'm going to the store for, or am I just going because, right? So in that same way, you need to kind of always be taking inventory in your life of like, what really matters? Like what should I really take the effort to do, or what should I be doing even if it's uncomfortable because it matters, right? So for instance, like sitting and watching Netflix on a laptop when it's like super cold and a screened-in porch is like, nobody wants to do that, but it mattered to us because that was the time we got to spend together, right? So to make it a bit of a relationship, but in general, like pay attention to what matters because that's what you're gonna hold on to even when times get hard. COVID was the first time for a lot of people in this world where it was like a world-shaking event. It affected everybody, and even something like, it was something that was so unbelievable, like, oh, that could never happen to us, right? Like our society would never be crippled by a pandemic or an illness or anything like that. But what I learned from that is like, it's part of authentic faith to realize that everything that you're comfortable with and everything you have could be rocked or even taken away from you at any moment. And you can't really live in authentic faith unless you're living with open hands and understanding that everything you have is kind of temporary and is kind of floating up in the air. So you need to like treasure that stuff, but also realize that nothing is just yours for the taking or keeping, I should say. God used that time to teach me a lot about who I was supposed to be for somebody else, like as a support system, and you know, what it means to, even if you're not going through the exact same thing. Like Rachel was a student who was living a life with her friends, like her girlfriends in this house, and then all of a sudden she's living back at home. Like it's a totally different change of pace. And for me, I had a hard time understanding that, but God was showing me like, you're not always gonna understand what Rachel's going through, what your wife is going through, but you can always just be next to her and help her through as best you can. And I think there's gonna be a lot more times in our life where that's the situation, but like now I've kind of gotten a little bit of a head start on gaining that experience. Because it's really, you know, you don't gain that experience unless you do it, unless you have something like that.
My situation totally changed from being in a university surrounded by hundreds of people every day and like socially doing really awesome, living with all of my best friends, to moving home and having a totally different change of pace, like online school. People I interacted with daily was my family, and then social distancing walks with Josh. And so for someone that's extroverted and really loves community and is used to living with a lot of different people, because I've been in school for 4 years, like that was hard. That was a really like hard change of pace. And I felt like my faith is definitely what got me through that. But I was also challenged by that in my faith as well, because for the first time I was like it was really quiet for the first time in like 4 years. And I was alone for like the first time. And I think that I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about like what I need as a person to like be okay with being alone and quiet. But I also learned a lot about my relationship with God, and that's just like at the end of the day, with everything going on with COVID and my schedule and everything changing all the time, like at least I knew every day, like I had God to lean on and I had him to talk to, and that was gonna always be consistent. For our wedding, we were faced kind of like with the same struggles. We didn't know like what things were gonna look like. We had no idea how to plan. We couldn't even really plan at that point. So I think like when we were preparing to get married, we focused more on that. We focused on what it meant to be married, with like literally just our family there. If it's not a big party, like what does it mean to us? And like we got to really focus on that, which is a blessing. But then also just our wedding day, I think that that's something that has really strengthened my faith, because my expectations were kind of low. And then the wedding day the weather was beautiful. We could have all our friends there. We could have our family there. Everything fell into place, and I guess I just saw like God's goodness, his blessing, and like just the gift that he gave us for that really special day, like that special like normal day. Like it was really awesome to experience that, especially given the year that we had leading up to it.
It was really a testament to like how God can bless you in really unexpected ways, because on paper you have this wedding where it's just our immediate families and like a handful of friends. Like we couldn't even have our whole bridal party at the dinner even. And so it was just like, at the end of that day, you wouldn't have expected it to be so great, but we wouldn't have changed a thing.